Hello and thanks for watching. This is the tuning tip video. Now we're going to talk about everything tuning tip threads here, and by the end you're going to be a master in the arcane knowledge of piano tuning tip threads. This is a weird and arcane subject here. So the standard in air quotes, because it's really not a standard that's been followed religiously, and this is something that would not be tolerated in any other industry that I can think of in the 20th or certainly 21st century here. So what we've got is a 3/8 30 threads per inch TPI. That's the thread that we nominally use for tuning tips. That standard has, once again, not been adhered to religiously across the board. So with our Reyburn ProTip, which is our newly designed tuning tip, I say newly designed, we've been working on this for almost 10 years in our Skunkworks Black Ops division. But you have to make some choices when you're choosing what thread to use. So I decided against 100% compatibility across the board. And the reason for that is it just pushes things too far into the realm of actually causing damage to high quality tuning levers and the heads that are equipped on those. So typically, pretty much across the board now, high quality tuning hammers, tuning levers are using just a little bit oversized. So this is almost 380 thousandths of an inch. And that interfaces really nicely. Just a little touch looser than super snug when it goes on our head. Okay? There are other heads out there that, just to show that this thread has been used for quite a while, this is a Coleman 20-degree short head. And this is also 380 thousandths, almost on the dot. Okay, this thread's on just fine. There you go. Now what I have here is an older style Hale head. This is way larger, 387 thousandths. So 7 thousandths doesn't seem like it should be a big deal, but that's the difference between this having a lot of resistance at this point and threading on smoothly and freely. It just barely gets to the end of this chamfer here. It gets to the end of that chamfer there, and then it starts to really resist. We don't want that. Other tuning tips that we've seen used, the Toffin tips, which we really like, but I do think this is a huge upgrade on it. The Toffin tips use a very similar thread, so let's grab this 380 thousandths, and that thread's on really nice. However, this 387 Hale, nope, it's not going to go. Okay. So how do I know before I order this really nice tuning tip that it's actually going to work with my tuning hammer? Well, there's a couple things that you need to check. Number one is length, or diameter of the thread, and number two is the pitch of the thread. Let's look at diameter. I've been showing that off a little bit already here, but here we go, 389, and of course you can use an inch micrometer or a metric micrometer and do the conversion there. If you're comfortable with those are very accurate ways to take this kind of measurement. So that should be in the 380 thousandths range. If it's 382, just dial in a 382 here real quick. There we go. If it's 382, that should still work. You may, if it's that large, you may need to use an anti-seize compound like this. Just put a dab on that thread and then swipe it up and down the length so that it gets distributed around and around. In other words, if it feels tight going on, but it's going on without a problem, yeah, use that anti-seize compound. If it's really tight and you just jam it down and you force it to go all the way, you're transferring that rotational friction into heat. You can literally melt and weld and gall the steel together, and that will form a permanent bond. It's a bad permanent bond, but it's a permanent bond. And you don't want to do that. You'll never get those apart without destroying them. And in fact, you've already destroyed them even just putting them together that way. So use some anti-seize compound if it's even a little bit tight. If it's really tight, for instance, if it's in this 387 thousandths range, or really anything larger than 385, I'd strongly recommend you get a hold of one of these rethreading dies. This is a fairly well used one, obviously, but you can get these from drillsandcutters.com, I assume McMaster, these large parts warehouses online. They do stock these dies, and you'll need some cutting lubricant and a tool to hold this, and you'll need to be able to hold this as well and thread these together. If this isn't for you, and frankly I don't blame you at all if it isn't, strongly recommend just upgrading and moving away from this design. The modern head style is just so much better than this. It's lighter weight, it's easier to switch over, it's less flexy at this joint. There's just so many improvements to be had over this. All right, so we've talked about width of the thread, diameter of the thread, and digital caliper, standard micrometer. Those are the easiest ways to do it. Now let's talk about pitch. These are pitch gauges. They're commonly available pitch gauges. Number one, you can talk to the manufacturer and say, hey, is this a 3/8 30? If that conversation isn't available to you, pull one of these guys out. Now this is a very inexpensive, it's a older Craftsman one. This one only has 28 and 32. Neither of those are what we're looking for. But if we hold this up here, let's just check this other head. Yeah, you can feel that this 28 just doesn't go all the way into any of these, and the 32, it's definitely too fine. You can hold this up to a light source and see the light coming in there, but yeah, neither of these work. The 32 and the 28 don't work. If you've got a more expensive thread gauge like this Metatoyo one, it very well may have a 30 TPI feeler here, and wow, boom, that's exactly right. This may also be a metric 10 by 1 millimeter thread or something similar. There's some tuning hammers off of AliExpress that are having that type of thread come out, and it looks very similar, but it does not work with what we're used to over here. Now let's look at some other tuning tips just to get some reference here. I don't have a BKB on the board, but I do have a Toffen, an older Watanabe. This is an older Hale, and this is one of those AliExpress tuning tips. And let's just do a fit test on a few of these. Okay, so of course here's the Reyburn ProTip. Now I also have some thread converters. This is between the Jan style 10 millimeter thread and the 3/8 30 thread. One of these, I believe this one is from Charles Falk, and this one is from Cassetto, but I'm not 100% sure. I could be backwards on that. Sorry, guys. So let's go ahead and thread this in here. Actually, let's take a measurement first. Here we go. Yeah, 375 and 382. So that 382 should work just fine with ours. That actually goes in really nice. Okay. And check it out. That's not going to work on the Chinese tip, but oh look, it's a 10 millimeter. Isn't that strange? Don't use these. Here's the old Hale. Okay. Look how loose that is. And let's use the old Hale head just as a comparison. This is actually really snug. It's going in smoothly, but these two threads were actually designed for each other, so they deserve each other. They can have it. Take that back out here. And let's go ahead and here's that Watanabe. And this yeah, that's tight. It's too tight. I would not put this in. If you can't thread it in with your fingers, you should tighten it down with a tip wrench. But you should not have to install it with a tip wrench. If you have to install it with a tip wrench, it's just too tight. Just stop. Don't do it. Okay, so that doesn't fit there. Let's try this. That fits just fine. This is going to fit just fine. And of course, our head as well is going to fit these exactly the same because it's a similar size. Okay. So we've had a little bit of fun here. We've looked at some tuning tip heads. We've looked at some threads. We've looked at some thread converters. We've figured out a few things that we maybe should and shouldn't do. Once again, measure the thread diameter, measure the thread pitch. If you can talk to the manufacturer like you can to us, just do that. That's an easy conversation to have usually. If it's just on the edge, use a little bit of this anti-seize compound. This stuff doesn't creep, and it'll keep your threads from being damaged. If it is over the edge, either replace it or rethread it. And that's just about all there is to it. Quick note on installing. When you do install it, you should be able to thread it on easily. It should go on all the way, just with finger tension. And then as your final move, you can just do this with a tuning tip wrench. And that's all that it should take to install this hammer, or this tuning tip. Don't go stomping it on the ground. There's no reason for that. These actually tighten down during use. Thanks for watching, and enjoy using your Reyburn ProTip, or however else you decide to tune pianos.